myself. I'm just going to take a moment. Okay, thank you. So Brand Israel was launched with the goal of protecting Israel's public image and distracting from the ongoing colonial violence and occupation of Palestine. So Israel was starting to have a really bad look. People were paying attention in a way they hadn't before, and Israel worked with US marketing experts to launch this campaign that painted Israel as progressive, modern, civilized, the only safe place for not only Jewish people, but also for queer people in the Middle East. And in doing that, it frames Palestinians as uncivilized, in need of civilizing, in need of saving. And it used pinkwashing as a strategy. And pinkwashing is using the guise of queer rights and queer liberation struggles to gloss over human rights violations and injustices. So Brand Israel, the pinkwashing part of that campaign is film festivals, visibility at pride parades, speaking events, free trips to Israel, tourism events, concerts, art events, you name it, that are really promoting this idea of Israel as what is a horrible term of gay Mecca. And pinkwashing is not only propaganda, but it's an extension of present and past colonial violence, and attempting to legitimize the violence of the state of Israel through demonizing and dehumanizing Palestinian people. So using racist and Islamophobic tropes to paint Palestinians as sexually regressive, uncivilized, and in need of saving, and Israel being their ultimate savior. And so this is harmful in so many ways. It denies homophobic oppression in Israel, which there is, as there is everywhere. It recruits queer people and their allies into unknowingly being complicit in the Israeli occupation. And it also, arguably most importantly, erases indigenous queer people in Palestine and in the diaspora, their lived experiences, their actual struggles on the ground, and their resistance efforts. So this is just an example of one of these trips, LGBT leaders' mission to Israel. I'll just let people look at that. I don't think I really need to say much. And also using this strategy that we see in the United States too, to shift queer liberation struggles, which are rooted in struggles against oppressive power structures, to focus on the right to serve in a violent military. And we see this in the United States as too, and I just wanted to speak briefly about the United States and parallels here. I live in Seattle and I was a youth worker and was really active when this Safe Place campaign launched. And this was at the height of the Black Lives Matter movement and protests happening in Seattle. And this was like a rebranding campaign by the Seattle Police Department to, promote themselves as a safe haven for queer and trans young people, especially. And obviously we've all seen, and I don't need to show like more graphic instances of police brutality. But just here, it's just like so ironic that on these queer crosswalks that are painted in Seattle, in the name of Seattle being a queer friendly city, there's a cop attacking a protester in this way. And just, yeah, again, bringing home that like the queer liberation struggle is rooted in resistance to brutalization and criminalization of queer people at the hands of police and military forces. So we know that the liberation of queer people and any people can't come with bombs and violent occupation. So just lifting up some anti-pinkwashing efforts, that this is what we're
so crazy.
We can't paint.
I know.
Thanks. Yeah, this can't be pinkwash. This is the colonization and the occupation of Palestine. This was at a Pride Parade in Tel Aviv. And this is some of the most egregious pinkwashing ever. Soldiers in the current slaughter and genocide and besiegement of Gaza, saying the first ever pride flag raised in Gaza. This soldier wanted to send a message of hope to the people of Gaza living under Hamas brutality. The intention was to raise the first pride flag in Gaza as a call for peace and freedom. So this is just using this like old strategy of flipping the script of like, who is the colonizer and who is the colonized, who is the oppressor and who is the oppressed. And it's, if you're paying any attention, it's really, really obvious what they're doing. And then this is just the kind of speech that's often targeted to anti-pinkwashing activists and queer people fighting for a free Palestine, is that, by the way, you're gay, there's no safe place for you as a gay person in Palestine. If you went there for a second, you'd be killed. And it's just, again, really, really erasing the fact that there are queer people in Palestine on the ground. And there's struggles for queer liberation as there is everywhere. And also queer people are suffering in the same way that all Palestinians are suffering under an occupation and an apartheid state. So I also just wanted to, in my like preparing for this talk, just uncovered, even though I've been doing Palestine solidarity organizing for 15 years now, like there's so much that I'm learning right now and so much that I don't know. And I think a big point that was kind of raised for me in preparing this, and I think that I can't adequately cover everything I want to, is that like queer Palestinians, even in anti-pinkwashing organizing, are often left out of the conversation and we're sidetracked. So I just wanted to lift up some voices from queer Palestinians on the ground. Sorry, this is formatting weird, but I just really liked this text exchange and wanted to read it. So this was to a queer activist, I believe, in the United States, text sent to him. It says, "Hey, Matt, I'm a gay guy from Gaza. It seems that you are getting attacked a lot from different LGBTQ plus members for defending Palestinians. And their response is always that they kill gay people or they throw them from a building. LOL, which is not the case. Here is exactly how it goes in Gaza. Gaza is like lots of religious communities. Premarital sex is not very welcomed here. In case if any couples get caught doing it, they don't jail them, they inform their families about it, since Gaza community is a big family society. It's the exact same thing for gay sex. They would inform your family and the family will act accordingly. I'm not saying it's rainbow and the families usually will accept. Yes, the person might be forgiven or kicked out of the house or even killed. And from what we see, it's the same thing for all queer people around the world. So yes, queer people in Gaza might struggle to survive. And yes, we don't have pride. And I'm gonna be honest, we didn't even try to have one, because the right of having a queer pride comes after some basic rights are fulfilled. If we have power and time to fight for rights, we will fight for our freedom just for the mere fact that we are Palestinian. Our kids are being slaughtered by IDF. So yes, I'm gonna fight for our kids and people to be free and safe before fighting for my right to raise a pride flag in Gaza. Israel's government made Gaza an impossible place for queer people to exist, because when you starve people, kill them, not letting them go anywhere, queer rights will never be a priority, even for queer people. So I'm not gonna raise a pride flag in the middle of Gaza just to satisfy and respond to privileged gay guys around the world who are supporting genocide, and I never will." And I'm running out of time, but just also wanted to lift up this group, Al Cause, which is a queer Palestinian grassroots organization on the ground in Palestine. And I got a lot out of reading this statement that they put out several years ago and a video accompanying it, and included that in the resource page.
Let's just pause a sec and let the interpreters switch.
Okay.
And Kyle, can you make sure the closed captioning is accessible? Okay, looks like we're ready.
Okay, thanks. This is the last thing I'll read, and I won't read the whole thing, but I really encourage people to read the entire statement that was put out by Queers in Palestine. I included them in the resource page for this event. And this is just the demands, but there's a really amazing full statement. I'm just going to read the do section, and then I will pass it off because I know we have a lot of amazing content on this panel. So this is a demand from Queers in Palestine. Do what anti-colonial queers have done for decades. Reclaim the narrative and set the terms of the conversation, this time about Palestine. What is happening in Palestine is genocide. Israel is a settler colony. Palestinians are a militarily occupied and colonized society. Under international law, Israel does not have the right to defend itself against the population it occupies, while Palestinians have the right to resist their occupation. Demanding ceasefire is the first step in holding Israel accountable for its crimes against humanity. We must also demand to break the siege on Gaza and the dismantlement of the Zionist settler colony. So just wanted to lift that up, encourage people to look more into these demands and also our cause. And just one thing I forgot to say is, and this is also in the resource list, is just that the US Army is the largest source of violence in the world, the US military machine, and that also the US police forces and the IDF have been in active collaboration with each other for at least 2 decades, sharing their practices and training each other. So I think just really encouraging us to be connecting those dots and connecting our struggles here with the struggle for a free Palestine.
Thank you so much, Benny. I just can imagine talking for hours about this. I just am so grateful for all of the learning that you've done around pinkwashing and sharing it with us. And it's just so sickening. And I can really feel in my body this desire to learn more and connect with some of those resources you've shared and really resist it as a queer person, resist the narratives. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us. We would like to also bring in Ray or Dove, if you would like to talk to us a little bit more about different angles of Israeli propaganda in the realm of greenwashing and what role it plays in the occupation and apartheid, and as well how water is weaponized in Palestine and Israel.
Well, we have a true expert in the room, Dove Baum, a dear friend and inspiration. I'm happy to give some general comments about greenwashing, or Dove would defer to you. Okay, I'll go ahead. And then keen to hear about your experience in both pink and greenwashing. Hi, everyone. Just taking a breath, breathing with you all, taking in all this information. When I think of pink and green, the themes of this event, I think of the sabra cactus, that sweet cactus fruit that grows in Palestine. In high school, I was very active with B'nai B'rith, BBYO, and my local chapter was called Sabra. What I didn't know at the time was that Zionist rhetoric was implicit in our youth programming. down to a slumber party event we had where we built the state of Israel as a map with graham crackers and chocolate. Palestine and Palestinians didn't exist on that map. This was a land without a people for a people without a land. And it really tasted so sweet. It's only in the last 15 years that I've been unlearning and uncovering the bitterness inherent in this Zionist narrative. And I will say I'm a recovering Zionist and actively seeking to co-create and be part of a Judaism that is beyond Zionism. And I just want to welcome people here wherever you are in that learning journey. I don't assume that we all come with the same facts or knowledge. And I know this is a moment where a lot of people are getting involved for the first time, paying attention to what's going on in Palestine. So welcome. What is greenwashing? I'm going to share a brief slide deck with you all. Hopefully you can see my screen. Greenwashing and definition is when a state or organization appeals to environmentalism in order to deflect attention from its harmful practices. So like pinkwashing, it's another tactic of what could be called brand Israel, to literally and metaphorically pave over the reality of occupation and of apartheid. I'm going to share a link in the chat to a really great article where you can read a lot more about this concept of greenwashing and find really good resources on the Decolonize Palestine website. So greenwashing is this form of environmental racism that has been used by Zionists to depict ecological preservation and describe Israel as making the desert bloom, right? All while continuing to pollute Palestinian land, planting invasive species, building ecological preserves to cover up ethnically cleansed villages, and presenting a theft of Palestinian water as a miraculous answer to water scarcity. It's a lot of propaganda to cover up the displacement and uprooting of Palestinians. There's this mythology that was perpetrated by Herzl and others that people living in Palestine didn't know how to do agriculture or how to make things grow, right? This like, we're going to come in with modern technology and make the desert bloom. And the reality is that, you know, this is a land that's been fertile for centuries, hence the name, the Fertile Crescent. I wanted to quote Michael Newman, this American Jewish philosopher, who said, "It doesn't matter if Zionists achieved wonderful things or turned the desert green. That I do wonderful things while acquiring the power of life and death over you hardly legitimizes my venture. It does not matter if Palestine was or wasn't a poor, neglected area. This could not possibly give anyone supreme power over its inhabitants." So false and wrong basis of this ideology. And some of you might be familiar with this box. This is a JNF donation box for the Jewish National Fund. JNF was established in 1901 in Switzerland and has played a key role in the Zionist movement in displacing indigenous Palestinians and paving over the ruins of Palestinian villages by planting invasive trees. I'm one of the people that on my bat mitzvah year went to Palestine and planted one of these invasive trees. I will place a link in the chat to a really good fact sheet about the JNF that you can find at the Institute of Middle East Understanding. So there's a really active campaign to protest the JNF. This is an action from about a week ago, friends in Denver doing a lockdown outside of their global conference. Another way this is being protested is by the Israeli group Zochrot, which created an app called iNakba, where you can literally GPS yourself and find where you are in the destroyed village that may have existed right where you're standing in Israel-Palestine. There's an article here on how Israel is erasing the Nakba through nature. And I just highlight this card from an organization I work with called Beautiful Trouble. It's called the principle of making the invisible visible, right? So I think Nakba is a great example of that, of really making visible the attempted erasure of Palestinian villages. You may have seen this pretty famous photo, a Palestinian woman clinging to her olive tree as trees are being destroyed by the Israeli occupation forces. Of course, we know the importance of trees in the Jewish tradition, Etz Chaim, the tree of life, that we are asked or commanded not to destroy trees. This is an abomination. It was a learning for me how valuable olive trees are in Palestinian community and society, and the idea that trees are part of our family. This is another form of resistance, protest, or sumud, steadfastness. Our friends at the Tent of Nations, Daoud Nasser and his family, who have had incredible farm and welcomed people from around the world to come and plant olive trees, and have faced again and again repression from the Israeli occupation forces, destroying their trees, their orchards, cutting off their supply of electricity, and making life unmanageable, to which they have responded by creating off-grid structures and systems for resistance and for thriving. Speaking of energy, I just wanted to touch on how solar energy is a big industry in the settlements now. Yet another form of greenwashing to say that the desert is blooming with solar energy. I don't have time to touch on the green-blue New Deal that is happening between Jordan and Israel, but something to look into to understand how climate resilience is being used as another way to continue and perpetuate the occupation. You can see in the lower right a solar panel in Gaza that was destroyed by bombing by Israeli airstrikes from 2022. And I won't go into detail with all these images, but I just wanted to mention about water, because here we are, we're the mikveh community, right? We're committed to doing ritual in water. But the Visualizing Palestine organization has provided a lot of useful graphics for understanding the extreme denial of water and lack of access to healthy drinking water, especially in Gaza right now. So people in Gaza have lost 97% of their average daily water consumption. The water is extremely contaminated. And I'll share the links to these as well. And the 97% of the water is contaminated and undrinkable. In the 2014 Israeli bombardment of Gaza, it almost completely halted wastewater treatment. Millions of cubic meters of wastewater were dumped completely untreated into the sea. Right? This dumping deteriorates the marine environment, turning 70% of Gaza's seashore unfit for recreational activities. And of course, harming the biodiversity there. So this is a quote from Hiba Tibi, who's at CARE's Gaza and West Bank County Director. My biggest fear is that waterborne diseases and dehydration will be more destructive than the bombing. And then, of course, we know that there are major environmental costs of war, always. Someone I want to recommend folks follow is Mazen Kumsia, who's a co-founder, creator of the Palestinian Museum for Natural History based outside of Bethlehem. And he does a lot of research on the environmental impacts of occupation. And just like in the climate crisis, youth are the biggest affected often by war. I am committed not to showing pictures of dead or mutilated children or people in the presentations and talks that I've been asked to give to support Palestinian freedom. This is a photo of a young girl who's participating in the UN supported Guinness World Book record making kite flying on the shores of Gaza. I've learned from Rebecca and from Nomi Lamb that it's so important to vision Olam Haba, the world we're working for. So I want to just leave you with that image of kids breaking a world record with kites instead of airstrikes dropping. And I'm going to skip ahead here to some more resources to say our futures are interrelated. And I want to really strongly recommend this book that I'm just digging into, which is by amazing author Saed Atshan, who works at the American Friends Service Committee and is a professor, amazing scholar, who wrote this book, Queer Palestine and the Empire of Critique. I will send out the link, and I'm happy to share all these resources in a follow-up email. Yes. Thanks. I'll pass it over to you, Dove, and very eager as always to learn from your wisdom and brilliance.
Thank you so much, Ray. I don't think I have much to add, but I will just punctuate some of your points with 3 short stories about companies that are complicit in the exact same issues you told, stories you told. Talk about greenwashing. So the Green Blue Alliance and the deep reliance of settlements in the West Bank and in the Golan Heights on green energy production is not a coincidence, because for wind energy and sun energy, what is necessary, of course, is a lot of area that has a lot of sun. The area is already sunny. And how do you get a lot of territory in such a very crowded country that is Palestine or Israel? Is when you take over somebody else's land. It's very cheap. There's nothing cheaper than stealing. So cheap land means you can create big fields for solar energy panels and then sell the energy. The same is true in the Golan Heights, that is blessed with strong winds. One such company is Energix. Energix is an Israeli company, but it has a lot of business in the United States. In fact, there is a campaign here in the US trying to stop them from spreading their business into cities where they sell green energy to cities in the United States. And we should keep our eyes and ears open to their business around us. Energix are famous for both supporting solar energy fields in the occupied West Bank on Palestinian land, but also on the occupied Golan land, which is Syrian land, and fighting off the local organizations of indigenous Druze people whose lands are being used for creating that energy. Going back to the West Bank, I don't know if we talk about water. I think many people in the US just assume that Palestine is a desert, but it is not. It is actually very rich with water. And for many years, Gaza, for example, was the place where most produce was being grown. And the same in the West Bank, there is a lot of orchards and a lot of agricultural production. So why is there a problem with water? The problem is with water is what we call water apartheid. In the occupation, Israel has actually systematically taken over all of the water sources it could. And some of the most rich water sources in the entire land of Greater Palestine, Greater Israel, is on the West Bank, on the mountain aquifer of the West Bank. So when building the apartheid wall, if you look on a map, Israel has taken over to the Israeli side or to the settler side all of the wells, all of the water sources. When Palestinians anywhere on the West Bank want to drill for new water, they have to get a permit from the Israeli authorities. Usually they do not get it. If they want to just retrofit or fix an old well, again, and again, Israeli authorities come and destroy water sources on the Palestinian side. It is a crime. It is a crime to see those bulldozers coming in and sealing wells that people depend on. Settlers take over springs that have been used by local communities and just seal them off from the local community and don't allow them to get near it. And there are dozens of cases in the West Bank where settlers have just taken over these springs. They don't even use them, but they make sure that the Palestinians will not be able to use them. There's extreme violence next to natural water sources. And for us as queer Jews, or let's say mikveh, the religious settlers use these springs as mikveh. as natural water sites for ritual bath. And this is an abomination. According to some studies in the Jordan Valley, the Israeli settler farmers annually use 81 times more water than Palestinians can in the West Bank annually, 81 times more. That is water apartheid. If I focus on one company, a lot of the agricultural products coming out of the Jordan Valley are sold internationally. They don't reach us all the way on the west coast of the United States, but you can see them in the East Coast, and you definitely can buy them anywhere in Europe. One such campaign was focusing on dates. Israeli dates coming from the occupied Jordan Valley depend on two things. They depend on water, which is from the mountain aquifer, and it also depends on not having competition from the Palestinian farmers in the Jordan Valley. And how do you do that? So you cut off the water to the Palestinian farmers. I used to work for a grassroots research project called Who Profits from the Occupation. It now has grown into an independent research center led by Palestinian women on the ground. I highly recommend it as a resource, whoprofits.org. One of the research we did years ago was looking into the dates and how they are produced. And we had one of our researchers going underground to a meeting of the Israeli farmers. It was quite hilarious because they were all like big burly men, settlers, you know, with mustaches, talking about pipes and fields. And she was a slight younger queer woman who obviously didn't look like one of the local farmers. And still we were able to hear their conversation about what to do with the Palestinian competition. And their decision was just to cut off their water supply. And if you ask yourself, how can they cut off this water supply to their neighbors? The answer is through their connections in the Israeli military in the occupation. And the last story I'm going to tell is about Gaza. Everything you saw, all the slides that Ray shared with us are true before these last 2 months. The water shortage in Gaza is something that has been, it's a man-made catastrophe that was created by the siege on Gaza over the last 16 years. So we have 2.3 million people who do not have clean water, and they depend on some supply from Israel, which they pay for dearly. They depend on desalination from the sea and pumping water from the ground that is already polluted and purifying it with purification plants. And ever since the beginning of this last attack on Gaza, the supply of water from Israel first was shut off completely for a few weeks until it was restarted. And then there is no fuel to operate the desalination plants and the purification plants, and there is no water. And water is coming in trucks, but not enough. And you can see videos online of people standing in line all day long with tanks to those trucks coming in order to fill those trucks. And I want to finish with one last piece of news. I don't know if you've been following it, but it was announced today. The Wall Street Journal had the scoop that Israel has started flooding the tunnels in Gaza. There is a story about all the tunnels under Gaza that are used for supplies and for bringing in all sorts of materials to break the siege, but also are used for military uses, and perhaps also used to hide the Israeli hostages. And Israel has been discussing publicly, but now actually announced to its US allies that it is already started today with the flooding process, flooding it with seawater. So here is another situation where people are being flooded. And obviously, it's not just the cost in people's lives and the infrastructures, but the cost in water. Because when you flood all the tunnels underneath Gaza with seawater, you destroy whatever is left of the clean water supply underground, because you raise the level of seawater, and that means that the water that is being pumped from the ground will no longer be usable at all. So I'm telling you that because this was an announcement to the Americans by Israel. And Israel doesn't just announce things to the Americans, it asks for permission. So this permission is given by our own administration. And here is another avenue for action. We have to stop those permissions from going through. If anyone could stop these atrocities from going any further, it is our government, the US government.
Thank you so much, Ray and Dove, for the just deep breadth and depth of wisdom that you've shared with us.
Oh, Kyle, you're frozen. Okay. I'm gonna take over, I guess. We're going to move on. Yes, thank you, Ray and Dove. And I wonder, we have Hadar Cohen with us, and I wonder, Hadar, if you might speak to who are Jewish Palestinians and Arab Jews, and how does their existence complicate the Zionist myth making?
Yes, thank you so much. Well, first, just really beautiful to be in this space together. Thank you for organizing, for showing up, for making it happen. It's, yeah, it's just really profound to be in this learning space together right now. Yeah, so where do I even start? I mean, I really, really want to recommend this article that came out. It's very, very long, but it's poetic, it's philosophical, it's political, and it says pretty much everything I would want to say, and I guess I'll piece out a couple of pieces from it. It's written by an Arab Jewish, Palestinian Jewish scholar. Her name is Ariella Aisha Azulai, and she's an academic, an artist. She has a few films that she made about Algerian Jewish community. That's her lineage. It's a mix Algerian Jewish and Palestinian. And this article just really, I feel like, speaks for me. And I feel that there's been so much erasure and invisibilization around Arab Jews. And, that's a very deliberate thing. And part of the Zionist project in general was to somehow create this unified Jewish national identity, in which all the communities across the world, like their Judaism in some ways was denied unless they were loyal to the state of Israel, right? The Zionist project was really a way of making all Jews loyal to a nation state project. And Arab Jews posed the biggest threat, right? Because for the Zionist movement, Arabs and specifically Palestinians, but not just Palestinians, right? Because we see what's happening in Syria and Lebanon as well, right? That Israel's currently also bombing. So Arabs, or this construction of Arabs, which we'll kind of talk about what that even means in a moment as well, is the enemy of the Zionist project. So if you have, right, Arab Jews, it doesn't make sense if you are trying to create this nation state. So what needed to happen was a way to tear Jewish communities away from their Arab identity and really even from their relationship with Muslim communities. And, one of the things that I think is quite wild that I think about regularly, but I feel like doesn't get acknowledged, is that this is the first time in the history of the Jewish world that Jews are not living embedded in Muslim societies. And that is completely shifting who Jewish people are, because so much of Jewish tradition and who we are as people got developed based on the context that we were in, right? We see so many different beautiful traditions around different, languages, songs, cultures, traditions of how to do separate things based on the conditions that they were in. And part of the Zionist project is that, and I think this is where we really have to understand both the play of Western Christianity and global imperial projects, being called like the West, right, which is really European colonization and US imperialism together. But, it's really, really inconvenient to have Jewish and Muslim people together, because that is very, very threatening. So, and this is part of also anti-Semitism, right? The way that anti-Semitism functions is to kind of see Jewish communities as this leverage point, right? That, oh, if you get the Jews, then, we kind of can be used in all these different ways. And, I think that part of what we're seeing with Zionism is the way that Jews have been used for imperial powers. Perhaps originally not necessarily with our consent, right? Because, especially in Arab Jews, there was a lot of forceful removal, almost you could say, and also a lot of fear and scare tactics. I recently hosted Avi Shleim on my podcast, who is one of the lead scholars around Arab Jewish identity. He just came out with a book called Memoirs of an Arab Jew. He was born in Baghdad and then moved to Palestine, Israel when he was 5, and now he lives in London and he's a professor at Oxford. But he talks that, he was one of the main, he's an Israeli historian, and he was one of the main historians to really research this phenomenon of how the Zionist project really wanted to scare Arab Jews and convince them that Muslims and Arabs, non-Jewish Arabs, are their enemies, and that they're always going to be their enemies. And in some ways, it's also kind of sowing this Islamophobic seeds that I think we are seeing how they've grown, right? These Islamophobic and anti-Arab seeds that have grown, all over Jewish community, sadly and tragically. And, we see this with different stories of Mossad agents planting bombs, famously in Iraq, and blaming it, making it seem like that's the Arab community targeting Arab Jews. And, so then the Jews felt unsafe, and then they had to come be part of the Zionist project. One thing that I think is also important that, the article that Ariella wrote talks about is just, for Arab Jews, Swana Jews, MENA Jews, Middle Eastern, whatever, because I don't also want to just be exclusive about Arab Jews, right? We're also talking about Kurdish Jews, Armenian Jews, right? Like all these different other groups of Jews who are also part of the region who don't necessarily identify as Arab, but are included in the region. Yeah, they really needed to make us forget our roots, because if we remembered our roots, the Zionist project would not be successful. So this way, and this is kind of similar to divide and conquer techniques. And we see that specifically around what happened in Algeria as well, French colonization of Algeria. The Jews and the Muslims lived there together. And part of what happened is that the French gave the Jewish communities citizenship overnight and denied citizenship to Muslims. So Jews all of a sudden became French, even though they were, Arab or Algerian before, while Muslims, right, remained Algerian or Arab. So, and then obviously that had a lot of resentment, because then the Arab Muslims were like, well, why do the Jews all of a sudden get to be European, even though they, were part of us? So Zionism was also in some ways this massive project. I think some Arab Jewish scholars would even call it like a Christianization project of Jews, right? In some ways, and specific in this case of Arab Jews, like ripping us from, right, Muslim societies, making us see like Arab and Islam and, Muslim folks as the enemy, or people who are, not in relationship to us, and really like using us for imperialistic agenda. So, Ariella Azoulay also talks about this in the context of the Jewish Muslim world, which, you know, we are living in a time of the destruction of the Jewish Muslim world. Like, you know, there was a deliberate interest to destroy the relationship between Judaism and Islam.
Hadar, I'm just gonna pause you so we can take a moment to switch interpreters.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Just let me know when you're ready.
Could you please spotlight? Yay, thank you.
Interpreters, are we good to keep going? Okay, thanks. Thanks, Hadar.
Thank you. That's good. I was like going on a rant here and I was like, okay, all right. But yeah, that, you know, there's been this destruction of the Jewish Muslim world. And there's a way that also, you know, this is also where we see kind of the term like Judeo-Christian, right? Which is actually anti-Semitic, but like this alliance of Judaism and Jewish people with Christianity in this sort of global imperial war against the East, which you can also think of as Islam, right? And, you know, I think this is obviously, these are big generalization, right? Thinking about it like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, but this is some of like, you know, part of the players that are feeding, and I want to be careful here, right? Because of course there's also Palestinian Christians, there's Arab Christians, it's not like Christianity's only, right? But what we see in the Western kind of Christian paradigm is that, you know, the Muslim East is the absolute enemy. And Jews are somehow, right, these people in the middle that, you know, that this is part of what the Western Christian world kind of discovered, is like, if we kind of get the Jewish community to be with us, that will be how we can be successful at, you know, kind of attacking the Muslim East. And I think Arab Jews, right, we suffered like such a loss of our lineages and our identities and our history because of that. And you know, and I think, you know, one thing that I really do recommend everyone read this piece by Ariel Azoulay, because one of the things I've been seeing in the different narratives and in the different stories right now, you know, I work with so many different communities, Jewish, Palestinian, Arab, and I really think that, you know, for a lot of Palestinians and a lot of Arabs, like, what's happening in Palestine right now, like this genocide that's happening in Gaza, is part of a larger frame of how the West has just been consistently decimating the whole region, right? It's not just Palestine, it's also Syria, it's also, you know, Egypt, it's also all of these places. And this is why, you know, even if you're not Palestinian, but you're an Arab, you feel Palestinian because you're like, this is our struggle against the West. And I think that this is something that can sometimes be lost in the Jewish community, right? Where people don't fully understand like what the stakes are, or just how much, you know, the SWANA, or the so-called Middle East region, is one of the most anti-Western regions in the world, you know, for very good reason. So for many people in that region, they're really seeing, you know, right, Israel as like an extension of US imperialism, which, you know, of course it is. I think the dangers that we, you know, in the Jewish community, is that our Jewish identity has become, you know, this glove of US imperialism. And this is part of what, you know, as anti-Zionist Jews, what we're fighting against is to say, right, of course, not in our name, and to reclaim Judaism from that. But with that, I think it's also really important, you know, that as we're kind of resisting and dismantling that, is that we also have to recover, right, this Jewish Muslim world. We also have to understand what Arab Jewish identity is, right? There are Jewish communities who spent thousands of years in Baghdad and Cairo and all of these places. We have deep histories to these places, that are this wider region that really sees itself, right? It sees its liberation struggle as Palestinian liberation. And what's the narrative that, yeah, sorry, I'm speaking fast. What's the narrative that can really help us shape that? And I think this is, you know, part of my piece that I would like to offer, because a lot of the times when I see narrative and Jewish Palestinian spaces around this, it really becomes about, right, the Holocaust and the Nakba, and the Holocaust and the Nakba, and the Holocaust and the Nakba. And that's definitely, you know, one kind of framework of what's going on, right, around trauma cycles and all of that. And, you know, I think it's really important that we also acknowledge that there is, right, this militaristic, imperialistic war that is like abound in capitalism and greed and oil and all of this stuff that, you know, this is part of why the US is not calling for a ceasefire, even though the majority of the people here actually want it. So, you know, I think that there's something there to acknowledge as well about this kind of West versus East. And as we're working to dismantle that, it's like, how can we also recover and reclaim and restore what was here in Palestine, but also in the whole region before any of this colonization started, this European colonization started that now is backed by US imperialism. And to me, right, because this Arab Jews, in some ways, we were like such a threat to the Zionist project, like recovering this identity is so, so, so powerful. Because, you know, it really, you know, this is something I remember having with a friend recently who's also an Arab Jew. He's from Yemen. And I asked him, I was like, don't you think it's strange that, and this was back in the land, and I was like, don't you think that this is strange that Yemen, which is your country, actually, this is where you are from, is now like the enemy, that the enemy is actually you, right? And this is something that a lot of Arab Jewish activists have talked about, you know, in their awakening towards Palestinian liberation. There's an activist who says, you know, you start realizing in the Israeli media and in, you know, all of this ways, the way that they frame the enemy as the Arabs, the Palestinians, you start to see that a lot of them really look like your grandma. That's what she said. She's like, the enemy is your grandma. So what do you do when the enemy is your grandma? You know, like, how do you reconcile that? Do you stop speaking Arabic? Do you stop, like, you know, eating Arab food? So yeah, I think that, you know, there's something about that restoration of Arab Jewish lineage that feels like a really important piece of this knot and puzzle. And also, you know, Palestinian Jewish identity that I didn't speak about so specifically. You know, like there was, of course, Palestinian Jews, my family included. You can read more about that in the article as well. But yeah, I think, you know, this is part of what it means to kind of dismantle a system of segregation that has made us think in binaries around identity, right? Like Judaism, right? And this is a longer project. That's maybe another session around the way that also Jewish people and whiteness and, right, this whole dynamic that's like, you know, for most of the US American community, like when they think about Jews, they think about, you know, John Stewart, like it's like the typical white Ashkenazi man, right? We don't necessarily think of Jews of color or Jews from other places of the world. So yes, and then, okay, I'll just wrap up. Nothing more queer than dismantling binaries. I actually love that. And I just actually want to take a moment to also lift up a podcast that I was featured in, because through doing this work, part of what I realized is that it was really easy to connect with other queer Arabs, like queer Arab Muslims or Christians, around Arab Jewish identity, because if you're queer, you're already queering all these binaries. So to you to be like, oh, of course, Arab Jews also, you know? And I think that one of the things that I would really love to see in the Jewish community is more learning and education about, you know, of course, Palestinians and Palestinian cultures and lineages, but also about Arab in general. And also having more context around, you know, some of the narratives in Arab communities, some of the stories. And yeah, so this is a podcast called Jins. It's about queerness and sexuality in the Arab world. I was hosted on there to talk about Arab Jewish identity and queerness. So very relevant to this question. And I'll also just put in the chat a book that a friend wrote called This Arab is Queer, which is basically queer Arab stories from all over the region. So much more to say, but that's it for now.
Wow, thank you so much, Hadar. Yeah, nothing more queer than dismantling binaries. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing your own experience and the way that, yeah, in the way that, you know, we have, as queer people, have experienced, you know, like queering gender and sexuality, and the way that that threatens systems of capitalism. And it definitely, yeah, the way that connecting to, yeah, your Arab Jewish identity and then your communities, the way that that is also doing work to dismantle, and just all of the intersectionalities that you bring up. It's, yeah, I'm just excited to dig more into the resources that you shared. So thank you so much for all of that. I would love to ask Rosa if you could share with us a little bit about, why do people keep using the claim that Jews are indigenous to Palestine as a way to justify Zionism?
Hi, I'm Rosa. So the way I greet people in my indigenous language is, so I say choe and you say choa, which means, are you good? And then you respond, I'm good. So I'm from the Muisca people in Colombia, and on my mom's side, but I was raised in the Jewish community of Vancouver, Canada, which is my dad's lineage. I get asked this question a lot. So first I want to kind of step back and answer the general question of, are Jews indigenous to Palestine? And my answer is no. And so the kind of quick version of that is, you know, the tagline I use is, anti-Semitism has turned us into colonizers on the land of our ancestors. So what do I mean by that? I mean that our people originally come from that land. You know, we have this historical connection. But a historical connection is not the same thing as a modern relationship. And the focus of my work in the world is revitalizing and reconnecting Native people who, like me, were not born in our native tribes or nations, and were raised in capitalism instead. And what I tell my students, we call it coming home work. And I've been doing it for the last 9 years and just started teaching it during COVID, and I'm writing a book about it now, is that we have a responsibility to be honest about the ways that being raised in capitalism has changed us as Native people. It's changed the way that we think about the world, how we behave, our values, and it's disconnected us from our hearts and our lands, our languages, and Mother Earth. And so it's a different story, the story of anti-Semitism. But, you know, my father's ancestors were tired of European feudalism and pogroms that were kicking shit out of them. And they made a deal to enter capitalism and to enter whiteness in, you know, coming to the United States. And that changes you. And there's no denying the mark that whiteness, white supremacy, capitalism leaves on any soul, and the Jewish soul is no exception. And so this idea that we can go back to how we were is a delusional hope that capitalism would allow for one ethical nation in the world, and it's going to be the Jewish one. There are no ethical nations on this planet. Nations are vehicles for capitalism to expand profit and resource extraction. They are always at the first step in nation building is always the genocide of the local indigenous population. And Israel is no exception, which is a big hurt to my heart. You know, my father's bones are buried there. I lived there as a child, and for 5 years. And it's but I think about those olive trees and how no indigenous person would ever cut down an olive tree. That's just not how we do. And so this claim to, this claim to Jewish indigeneity is another ploy of the right to take leftist critique and analysis and weaponize it and repackage it in order to justify colonization and the right-wing political agenda. Why do they do this? For the same reason that a lot of Jews do oppressive things, which is anti-Semitism, and that they're terrified. They cannot imagine a world where they could be safe and if they're not in control. And all of the unresolved and unhealed Holocaust trauma of white Ashkenazi Jews of European ancestry, it has become the Palestinian nightmare. And I'm very familiar with this narrative of like, you want our land, but you don't want us as people. And that's the other reason, is that it's just pure resource extraction and profit. And it's all, this necessary part of capitalism. Like, capitalism cannot function without white supremacy. It cannot function without anti-Semitism, because it's all built in to the system to keep it invisible and keep it going. Yeah. So I think that's all I have to say about it.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, wow. Yeah, one of the last things you just said about the unprocessed Holocaust trauma is become the nightmare of the Palestinian people. It's certainly something I've been thinking a lot about, and just, yeah, the way that you pulled it together with your words just really hit me. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, I just am appreciating the also the distinction between indigeneity versus a historical relationship, and an indigenous person would never cut down an olive tree. So yeah, thank you so much, Rosa. We have some more questions that we'd love to ask. We're running a little bit late on time. I would like to take an opportunity to switch interpreters and also ask the ASL team, are you able to stay a little bit past the time that we have allotted?
This is the interpreter team speaking. We have all agreed that yes, we're willing to stay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, because yeah, just excited to keep connecting with the just fantastic knowledge that we have in the room. Yeah, so this question is for everyone. I don't know if any of you at this point are also feeling sick in your stomachs at the just deeply insidious, intentional way that the Zionist project is incredibly harmful to some people, and in the service of creating a nation that serves other people. And I would love for all of you here with us today to answer, how can we use our bodies, which are mostly made of water, as agents of change to align with global movements for liberation? How can we mobilize our Jewish and queer communities in the work for a free Palestine? How can we resist this? So yeah, whoever feels called to answer first, feel free to jump in.
I'll jump in because I feel like an elder. Back in 2000, I was part of a direct action group called Black Laundry. It was a queer direct action group inside Israel that brought together mostly Jewish and some Palestinian queers against the occupation and for social justice. And whoever wants to hear more about that, I have a whole album of our pictures taking our clothes off and wearing on our bodies images of the atrocities in Gaza that were already happening in 2001, 2002, 2003. When the big suicide bombings began, I remember we were carrying cards that say, if in case my body is found on one of these exploded buses, my wish is that no one will go out and kind of enlist it to some vengeance campaign to kill more people. Looking back, I do think we were quite naive, but it was my political school. This is where I learned everything I know and do ever since. Here in the US, my recommendation to all of you is to remember that we are part of this, not just as Jews, not just as queers, not just as Americans, not just as human, as all of the above. We are implicated. And the whole point of the Palestinian call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions is to find out how we are implicated in this. Are we implicated because of our role in capitalism for what we buy or who we work with, or through our university or our trade union, or through the artists that we love is going to perform in Israel? How are we implicated? We are not clean. We cannot cut our ties to this situation of extreme oppression, genocide, and destruction. The only way forward is to recognize our ties to it, to track our own complicity and use it for good, yes? Use it for good. Use it for leverage with others on the institutions around us in order to build effective leverage. So we start with the 5 people we work with, and then we move over to our school or our city or our state, and we want to reach a point where the structures of oppression in Israel, which are not global colonialism, they are just one part of it in Israel, a small country, are isolated, and that the global supports, economic, diplomatic, and other types of support that Israel receives are cut, because Israel is not the US and Israel is not even South Africa. It cannot do it on its own. And maybe I will add some resources in the chat for specific campaigns you can enjoy.
Would anyone else like to jump in with how do we resist? How do we mobilize our communities to work towards Palestinian liberation?
Yes, I can share. I think 2 main things. One feels really important is to build relationships with Palestinians and to really dispel, we have to like actively embody a different reality in which it's not Jews against Palestinians. We have to like show up with Palestinians. For me personally, it's like all my Shabbats include Palestinians now, because I feel like we need to just be building relationships, and this just feels so central to movement and activism, and not just organizing together on the streets, but also building emotional, caring, loving, like this to me disrupts so much of the narrative. And in addition, of course, to all the direct action that I feel is quite necessary, and there's many organizations doing direct action. And one thing that I'll also plug is that I think it's really important in the Jewish community that we continue to actually, challenge our institutions. I think that sometimes there is a pattern for us to want to say, like, these Jewish institutions are too Zionist, let me tap out, which, of course, case by case, sometimes that makes sense. But I think that we also have to, in some ways, change and transform and challenge, right? We can't just walk away from these institutions, because these are the institutions that are ending up supporting, right? Especially if we're here in the US, like the main thing that we need to do is to put pressure on our US government to stop military aid and to call for a ceasefire. Like that's the most urgent thing right now. So, you know, it's like this twofold thing. It's like putting that pressure on the government, but it's also changing the narrative, that this is some, you know, because I think so many people who are not Jewish or not Palestinian or not connected to this conversation, they want to support Jews, right? So they think the way to support Jews is to support Israel. So we really have to, you know, challenge that, disrupt that, and also work within our Jewish community to help educate, to help transform, to help move people so that our Jewish institutions are not supporting, you know, this genocide anymore.
Thank you, Hadar, and thank you, Dove, as well.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I also wanted to add that, you know, being in the streets and being active can be kind of spiritually depleting. And so I think that as we are, you know, protesting and writing letters and doing and boycotting and doing all the activist things that we're supposed to be doing, like I wrote a mikveh ritual for Palestinian life, because it is so important to keep filling our own cups and not be draining ourselves to the point that we can't function anymore. You know, this is not the only genocide that is happening in the world. There's genocide that's happening all the time to my people, to hundreds of nations in the United States and across Turtle Island, to, you know, wars happening all over the world. And so to me, my personal perspective about how do you survive all of that is to remember that the world is beautiful and that there's a difference between people and what they do out of trauma and hurt and, you know, capitalism and all the things. And the fact that even if you're, you know, a total jerk today, the sun will still rise on you tomorrow. And the sun does not say you were a jerk today, so tomorrow no sun for you. And so I think there's a spirit of we have to forgive the unforgivable.
You drink any water?
And be and be as generous as Mother Earth is to all of us with each other, even as we witness people doing horrible things.
On that similar note, I wanted to
I just want to pause a moment so we can switch interpreters.
We're going to have time for a few questions, but we want to give people a moment to answer this one.
when could I still say something or no?
Oh, we were just going to give all of the panelists a chance to answer this question, and then we're going to have time for questions.
I'll speak quickly. I feel like I really resonate with a lot of what was shared. I think I definitely am guilty of giving up on mainstream Jewish institutions, and I want to challenge myself. And like as an organizer with JVP, like a big goal of ours is moving Jews into action and political education. And I think that we have to find the ways to bring American Jews along and into this movement. And I think, you know, there's so much like media repression and censorship, even if you're using like these, like the internet or social media or ways that you can kind of pass through that. It's still like there's so much repression and censorship. So it's hard, but I think that if we can get people to look, if people look, like they can't look away. It's impossible to like look at what's actually happening in Palestine and forget it and not be paying attention anymore. So I think whatever we can do to get people who aren't engaged to look and see and witness, that's a big first step. And I'm trying to, for myself, figure out how those conversations can go, and how to be like a bridge builder in that way. And then I think just also like moving away from like single issue social justice. Like if anyone is working on any social justice struggle, which most people have something that they're passionate about, tying it all together. And especially like I think that the pinkwashing stuff really ties to that, because it's like, let's just focus on gay rights and pretend that like the struggles of queer people globally aren't rooted in colonization and white supremacy and nationalism. So really, challenging anyone who's a single issue social justice person to look at how all these systems interlock and work together, and doing that in a connective way, because it's really hard to not just be angry and push people out who aren't on the same page as you, but we all start somewhere. And I think just really bringing people along and inviting them in and making movement feel irresistible and sustainable and joyous, and so important to our like reclaiming our souls and our livelihoods.
Thank you, Benny. That is such good wisdom and such a helpful reminder for me personally in my organizing. I'd love to take a few questions for our panelists. If you could use the raise hand function, and then I'll invite people to unmute.
Is it okay to just add one more thing about action before a question?
Yeah.
Just maybe some of you have seen this on Instagram because it kind of went viral, but there's a Syrian Jewish tradition of lighting an extra candle on Hanukkah. And this was because after the expulsion of Jews from Spain, a lot of Jews went to the Swana region. My family went to Syria, and the Syrian Jews had this custom of lighting a 9th candle for Syria, welcoming them in. So yeah, part of my ritual practice for Hanukkah this year has been to light a candle for Palestine and for Palestinians. And, I do think I'm a spiritual practitioner. I do believe in the power of prayer. And I feel that collectively, right, if we're lighting candles together, right around the same time, especially as Jewish people, like that actually does shift energy in the world. So if you feel called to join in lighting an extra candle for Palestine alongside Hanukkah candles, that's an offering.
Thank you for that offering, Hadar. Amber, I see your hands raised. Would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Weren't there other people before me? I think so.
If you did, I lost you. If you could raise your hand, your Zoom hand again, if there's someone else who wanted to ask a question. I don't see anyone else with their hand raised right now. So why don't you go ahead,
Yeah.
Amber, and then if that person comes back and
Yeah.
raises their hand, we'll do them next.
Yeah. I have like these two things that I think are interconnected, but one thing that has been like, as a person with disabilities and like chronic illness and neurodivergence, that makes it the kind of organizing that happens when there's like an emergency and we have to put a lot of pressure and be out there all the time, is it doesn't work for me. Like I could manage, but I'm really struggling, and so I've been asking myself, like, what is actually the thing that as a disabled person, as a neurodivergent person, is like a better thing for me to do, and that doesn't feel like just a constant struggle and like really hard to show up, and I come to the conclusion that like I can have hard conversations with people, and so I'm really kind of trying to study the ways to have conversations with people who do have attachment to the state of Israel, and one of the things that I'm struggling with to talk to people about is the question of Jewish safety, and how people feel like actually really afraid and think that is, they think the state of Israel is the answer. But I haven't heard a lot of people having a response to that feels like it would be satisfying to people who feel very unsafe as Jewish people, and there is not really. I just haven't heard anybody being like, "Here's an alternative," to attachment to the state of Israel, because there's a lot of actually good reasons that people can give why they feel unsafe that are true things, why Jewish people feel unsafe in the world and like don't know where to go to feel safe. And maybe, I don't know, some people feel more safe than others. Like I have parts of my family that are not Jewish are actually extremely anti-Semitic and scary. So like I've had exposure to that, so I don't want to invalidate people being like, oh, I'm scared, and I wonder if people have an idea of like what does it say to people who feel scared and they don't feel like Jewish safety is being addressed, and by the left especially don't feel like Jewish safety is being addressed. So yeah.
Do you want the panelists to respond now to each question, or do you want?
Yeah, if you have a response, we'd love to hear it.
I think the safety of everyone, including Jews, is about our relationships. That the idea that a nation state, which is a capitalist construct, will keep us safe is a fantasy born out of desperation and trauma. Because it hasn't been true during the entire establishment of the state of Israel. There has never been peace on that land for the last 75 years for anyone. And it's hard to say this to someone who's deep in their feelings, but our feelings lie to us, especially our traumatic ones, because they want to survive in our bodies and keep going. And the sort of hard work of healing from that trauma is partly about facing those feelings. But the work that I focus on is about remembering the beauty of the world and that love are bigger than those feelings. And because they're an endless pool, there will never be an end to fear. And courage and safety are about choosing to close the door on that and walk down the hallway and open a different door. And so, we will always feel most strongly the emotions that we pay attention to. And that's why there are a lot of Native teachings about, having good thoughts and positive thoughts. Because when you plant those seeds in your garden, those are the flowers that will bloom. If you plant thoughts of despair, trauma, hopelessness, grief, those are the flowers that will bloom. And so it's this compassionate, but also rigorous self-assessment, honesty, and responsibility taking that we have to remember that the Holocaust is over, that it ended a very long time ago, and that even though acts of anti-Semitism are still happening all over the world all the time, that we have agency now to fight back against those acts of anti-Semitism, and that we also have more friends than we think we do. And we can organize with those friends where we are to ensure our safety. So those are my thoughts off the top of my head.
Wow, thank you so much for that, Rosa. That question comes up a lot, and I know that I will be taking that in your response and working to embody it so I can share that with people when it comes up. My apologies to Ray, who I didn't leave Ray a chance to answer the question about resistance and how we can take action to organize our communities. So I'd love to hear from you, Ray, and then we'll be closing out for the evening.
No apology needed, and learning so much from you all. I guess what comes to mind, given that many of us might be identifying as witches or priestesses or people who practice mikveh, is the power of water. And water extinguishes fire. And so I'll just say the obvious. One thing that we can do is to call for a ceasefire. And one way we can do that is consistently, as a spiritual practice of calling on our elected officials every day. And one way to do that in community is to join the Jewish Voice for Peace Power Hour. Many organizations are doing power half hours, but I'll recommend one, which is the Jewish Voice for Peace, every day, noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, maybe except Shabbat. You get a little update on courageous direct action, and then you call Congress, or you write a letter to your local newspaper, or you take some other action that they guide you through. But one action a day is more than enough, dayenu. So wherever you're at, whatever your ability, your capacity, I think every bit matters. We don't know which seed we plant will flower into that garden of justice that we envision. And I'll just share the link to the Power Half Hour and another link on calling Congress. You can put the phone number in your speed dial. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Ray. Rebecca, do you want to close us out?
Yeah, we'll take a minute to switch interpreters.
Great.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. This has been such an incredible conversation. And the good news is there's going to be part 2 next week on Monday. And so the link to register for that is in the chat. Maybe Kyle, you can make that a link. I just didn't link it. And I just want to thank all of the speakers, everyone who came today and just cares about this and wants to be involved. Thank you, Kyle, so much for your facilitation. Thank you to an incredible ASL team. I don't know if people knew, but we had a team of hearing interpreters and deaf interpreters, and they have been amazing. You can just, I know interpreters, I'm not supposed to focus on you a lot, but I also want to lift up this incredible contribution that you make to our community. And this is being recorded, and there are a few deaf folks who are interested in Queer Mikveh Project work. So if they weren't here, they'll be able to access it online later too. And also just want to put it out there. I know some people made contributions today to this, and we would really love if you haven't, or if you want to make more of a contribution. We are putting these funds towards a mental health clinic in the West Bank that we have developed a relationship with. We have been able to send them $4,000. And Kyle, I think we'll put the links in the chat for how to, yeah, there's our PayPal. And yeah, from our last event, we raised a bunch of money. Another organization contributed some money. So, and we also raised $2,000 for the Queer Mikveh Project, which, just to give you a little bit of sense, like if we were to pay ourselves fully for our organizing, pay all the ASL interpreters, pay all the speakers for this event, it's actually a $5,000 event. So just to give people a sense of the labor and the time that goes into something like this. So if you make a contribution, we will split it between Queer Mikveh Project and this mental health clinic. People have asked us, well, who are they? Like, what's the name of them? And I just want to explain a little bit about that because unfortunately, because of Zionism, there's a complicated relationship that a lot of Palestinians have with the West. And there's a level of anonymity that this clinic has asked us for. So per their request, we aren't going to name who they are, but please know that they serve all people, all different kinds of people. They do have queer clients, and they just started forming specifically a girls group. And anyway, they're doing really wonderful work, really important work. And as you can imagine, mental health support is essential right now. And what's happening in the West Bank, we didn't really talk about that too much, but it's also really intense. Yeah, so thank you everyone for, and if you want to just write in the chat if you're going to contribute and how much, we would love to celebrate you. And I know a bunch of people already did too. So yeah, thanks everyone. Okay, thank you. The 18, hi baby. That's so sweet. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And just one other shout out for next Monday. Come join us again. Yay, $36. Thank you. There's also Thursday night, Jewish Voice for Peace hosts a Rosh Chodesh group online, and you are really welcome to attend that this month and yay, thanks Ocean for $50. Yeah, and so there's a URL for signing up for the Rosh Chodesh group on Thursday. So please join us. I'm going to be facilitating this month, and thank you to Sherry Paris, who's been organizing that. She just sent me a note, please promote it. So here we go. And then I'm seeing another note, If Not Now is also doing an event for Hanukkah ceasefire on Thursday. If you're in Olympia, we're doing an event tomorrow too at Percival Landing. And with that, we're going to say goodnight. We'll send out the recording. We'll send out all the resources, and we're going to hopefully get this up on the YouTube channel so that it can be accessed long-term and just be like a resource for our community that people can reference. Thanks, everyone.
Hey, thank you all for